Hello, Science fam. Now we look at the backside of Ionic and Covalent worksheet number 1, and you'll notice that now things are mixed up. We don't know if we're in the Covalent or the Ionic section. So we need to get used to and practice whenever we're going to name or write a formula. We want to pay attention to whether it's Ionic or Covalent because they both have different rules. So let's jump right in, but the idea will be first you need to label it as either Ionic Covalent and then give me the formula. So first off in number 1, we'll notice that this compound starts with zinc. If you look on the periodic table or the ion sheet, you'll notice that zinc is a metal. So when a metal and nonmetal come together, that means that this compound is ionic. So when we write a formula for an ionic compound, we have to look at the charges of the ions. So when I look on my ion sheet, I notice that zinc is 2 plus. And when I look at the sheet, oxygen is 2 minus. So because they're 2 plus and 2 minus, they cancel each other out to 0. So when we write the formula for zinc oxide, it's ZnO. All right? Looking at number 2, diphosphorus trisulfide. First of all, there's a couple things you notice. The di and the tri are prefixes. And we know we only use the prefixes for covalent compounds. So technically, that's one way we can tell right away that it's covalent. The other way is that phosphorus and sulfur, which is sulfide turned back into its regular atom name, both of those are nonmetals, which means that this must be a covalent bond and a covalent compound. So to write this formula out, it's simple. We've got phosphorus and we've got sulfur for sulfide, and the di and the tri tell us that there's 2 phosphoruses and 3 sulfides. So we can write the formula that way. All right. Looking at the next one, you have di and penta, which means that these are nonmetals with prefixes, so this must be a covalent compound. Again, take the moment every time now and look at, does it have prefixes or not? If it has prefixes, it's covalent because they're all nonmetals. If it doesn't have prefixes, it's ionic because it must have a metal involved. From there, write it out properly. Nitrogen and it's dinitrogen, so there's 2. And pentoxide, so oxide is oxygen and penta is 5, so N2O5. The next one is potassium chloride. Potassium is a metal. If you look on the periodic table, it's on the left side, and there's no prefixes, so this must be ionic. If I look on my ion sheet now, I know potassium has a +1 charge and chloride has a -1 charge. So when those come together, again, this is an easy one. I only need one of each to equal 0, so it becomes KCl. All right? This next one says cobalt 2. Cobalt is a transition metal, so that must mean that this is going to be an ionic compound. Now, if I look, I don't even have to look on my ion sheet for cobalt 2. The fact that it has a Roman numeral 2 means that it's a 2 plus charge. If I look at nitrate on my ion sheet, I'll see that nitrate is NO3 and has a -1 charge overall. So if cobalt has a +2, I'm going to need 2 whole nitrate ions in order to cancel out the cobalt. So I'm going to write 1 cobalt and then I'm going to put nitrate. Notice the NO3 never changes, it just stays in parentheses, and I'm going to put 2 of them to cancel out the cobalt. But by looking at the beginning element, if it's metal, it's going to be ionic. If the beginning element is a nonmetal, it's going to be covalent. All right? You have to get used to doing that. If you don't take the time to do it, you might be guessing wrong and writing formulas wrong and not looking at the ions or something like that. So take the time, get used to doing that. All right, this bottom half, we're going to be doing the same thing. We have to figure out if it's ionic or covalent and then properly name it. Remember, there's 2 different forms of naming. For covalents, you have to use mono, di, and tri. But for ionics, you're just going to use the ion name. So let's start. You have nitrogen and oxygen. When I look on the periodic table, both nitrogen and oxygen are nonmetals. So this must be a covalent compound. If it's covalent, I should know to myself that means I have to use prefixes. So if I have 1 nitrogen, I'm just going to say nitrogen. I don't have to use mono if it's the first one. But since there's one oxygen, I do have to use the prefix mono for that, nitrogen monoxide. So do you see the difference? If it wasn't covalent and it was ionic, we would just call it nitrogen oxide. There'd be no mono in there because that would be for ionics. So you have to look at the compound and look at the elements inside to see if it's ionic or covalent. Next one, sulfur. Sulfur is a nonmetal, so is oxygen. Two nonmetals means that this is covalent. And if it's covalent, we are going to use prefixes. So there's one sulfur, so we're just going to use the word sulfur. But there's three oxygens, so we're going to use the prefix tri for 3, and we're going to turn oxygen into the word oxide to end it as sulfur trioxide. Now this next one is a little different story. Copper, we know, is a metal. It coats pennies. So if it's a metal inside this compound, it must be ionic. And when we worry about ionics, we have to figure out the names of the compounds. So I don't care that there's one copper and 2 nitrates. When I name this, I'm just going to call it copper nitrate. But there is a catch. Copper, as you know, has more than one charge. So I'm going to leave a spot for a Roman numeral, and we have to figure that out. So if I look at this compound, I've written 1 copper, and it looks like I have 2 nitrates. Now nitrates overall have a -1 charge. So if this is going to add up to 0, my copper has to have a 2+ charge. Why? Because -1 and -1 is -2, and +2 would cancel it out. So therefore, because the charge is +2, I need to let the world know that this is a +2 copper charge. So now that I have my ionic name, you have to make sure and check, do I need a Roman numeral? Only for common ones like copper, iron, tin, mercury, and lead really is when that comes up. All right, let's look at this one. Ag is silver. Silver is definitely a metal, so this is going to be ionic. Silver only has 1 charge, so we don't have to worry about Roman numerals. So we're just going to call this silver oxide. Why? Because ionics don't use the prefixes, so we don't have to call it silver monoxide. You literally have to stop after each one and say, okay, if this is ionic, what's the rule? Just use the ion names. All right, I will not use prefixes on this one. All right, this last one though, you will use prefixes because phosphorus and sulfur are both nonmetals, and only nonmetals means that it's a covalent compound. All right, because of that, we are going to use our prefixes. 4 phosphoruses means that it's going to be tetraphosphorus. Phosphorus is a long word. And you're going to have 3 sulfurs, so it's going to be trisulfide. There you go. Important. You have to figure out if it's covalent or ionic first before you can properly write the name. If you don't do that, you're just guessing and you're bound to get things wrong. All right? Good luck. Hopefully this is a great stepping stone for you to continue to practice. I have faith in you. I know you'll do great. Be well.